All right. Hello, Algebra 1. I apologize that I am not there today. I will hopefully be back tomorrow. I'm really hoping I'll be there on Tuesday. Um, I'm sorry I missed so many days with state tests coming up. I feel really bad. But because state test is coming up, we got to keep talking, got to keep moving along. So today we're going to learn from this video. We're going to talk about quadratic formula today. So we have been looking at methods of solving quadratics recently. We kind of have three main methods of solving quadratics at the moment. So one method of solving quadratics is always graphing. When I go onto Desmos, I can create a graph, I can plot it, or I can type in my equation onto Desmos, and I can see when does it hit the desired value. So if I'm looking for when a quadratic is equal to 5 or equal to 0 or equal to 10, I can graph that quadratic and I can look, okay, when does it hit the value of 5? Oh, right there and right there. When does it hit the value of 10? I'm just looking for those intersections with that value. And then so we get x equals something and x equals something are the two intersections. That was probably the easiest method we've ever talked about. Factoring was the one that we've been working on recently, using the box method to create the quadratic in a factored form, then finding the intercept. So we know we have to create the box method, factor the quadratic, so we have those two factors, and then once we get those two factors in the parentheses, we can set each of those equal to 0, and then solve those. So this factor equals 0, solve to get x equals something. This factor, set it equal to 0 to solve, get x equals something. If they were the easy factors like x plus 2 and x minus 5, we would just take the inverses of them to get negative 2 and positive 5. But we were just setting those factors equal to 0 and solving. That wasn't too bad. And that's what we were practicing quite a bit last week. And then we also talked about square roots last week. So square roots is when we had to use a square root to solve it like an equation. So we had like something squared equals some number. So we had to take the square root of both sides to get rid of our square because those were inverse operations. That left us with whatever was in the squared part was equal to the plus or minus answer of our square root. So whatever our square root number came out to be, if it was like the square root of 16, we had positive 4 and negative 4 because both those met our solution set. So we set whatever was in our parentheses, whatever was being squared equal to those, and we had to solve for x for two of those. Typically, we got two answers. Sometimes we only got one answer depending on what the square root was that we were taking, but because of that positive and negative, we got two solutions for those. So those are the three methods we've talked about so far. One of the things we've been working on is trying to recognize when should I use which method, when should I use factoring, when should I use square roots. But today we're going to talk about a method that is super handy that we will use for the rest of algebra, that we will use in algebra 2, that you use, you can even use in pre-calc or calculus. This is a super handy, actually we've used it in geometry this past year as well. So this is a super handy method called the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula is super nice because sometimes when we are solving quadratics, like some of them aren't factorable. We can't solve it because it's not factorable. The quadratic formula is super cool because it can solve those problems that even aren't factorable. We can do it even for those. So there, you will always get a solution, which is pretty neat. The thing about the quadratic formula is it's kind of intense at first. It looks kind of scary. It looks kind of crazy. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to see some examples, and we'll talk about how to make it a little bit easier for ourselves. So this is the quadratic formula. It's this big mess of letters and numbers and symbols and whatnot. This is our quadratic formula. And the cool thing is you do not have to have this memorized. Your state test reference sheet, and like when we have a quiz on this, this will be on your state test reference sheet. This will be on your quiz. You do not have to have this memorized, but knowing it and knowing the different parts of it will make it easier for you to solve it the more familiar you are with it. So what the quadratic formula is, it's x equals, because we always have, like with all of our answers, it's always x equals something. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. So let's break that down, what each of those things mean, because right now it's just a bunch of different symbols. So x equals, we talked about, that's always like our answer. It's x equals something. The a, b, and c letters, those come from our quadratic in standard form. So when we think about our quadratic when it's in standard form, it's ax squared, not u squared, if I can type, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So just like with factoring, we have to make sure our quadratic is in standard form with from ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. We have to have those terms set it equal to 0. So I can't have things on both sides of my equation. Everything all has to be on one side. But when we look at that, that tells us what is our a, what is our b, and what is our c from our quadratic. So I just have to look, what is the number in front of my x squared? Whatever the number in front of my x squared, that's what my a is going to equal. Whatever the number in front of my b is, or my x term, that's what my b is going to equal. Whatever number is going to be my constant at the end that doesn't have any x, that's going to be my c. And once I know each of those terms, I can plug that into our formula. I'll do the opposite of whatever the b sign is, plus or minus the square root of my b number squared minus 4 times my a term times my c term, all divided by 2a. And I only care about the numbers. I do not care about the x's. So it's always going to have x equals, but I know my answer is always just going to be x equals. So honestly, if I got rid of this part in the quadratic formula, I don't really need this part here because this is the important meat of the formula. I just know my answer is going to be x equals some number, x equals some number. So you don't really have to have that part there when you're at it, because we just care about what is the number of a, what is the number of b, what is the number of c, and then we're going to plug it in, and then our calculator is going to help us with the rest of it. There is a little mnemonic that we can kind of use to help us memorize this if you need to. Once again, you don't have to have this memorized, but the more you recognize it, the more you know it, the easier it's going to be for you. So if you want to have this memorized, there's a little song that goes for it. So you can thank Mrs. Rupright for that. Actually, if you want to go ask her, she can probably sing it for you right now. But the song is like for Pop Goes the Weasel. So it's the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. And it goes, the opposite of b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And so it's, once again, it's the Pop Goes the Weasel. Opposite of b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And that's our quadratic formula song. I will sing it to you more when I get back, I promise. I can guarantee it. We can sing it together as a class. It'll be great. We'll start a little quadratic formula choir. So let's see this in action, though. I make sure the quadratic formula is up there on reference. Make sure you have those notes out that you should have been given. We're going to solve this first question together as a group. Okay, so the very first thing we want to do is check, is it equal to 0? Yes, my quadratic is equal to 0. Then the next thing I want to do is write down what is my a, my b, and my c. So in this quadratic, my a, the number in front of my x squared term, the number in front of my x squared term is 2. The number in front of my middle term, my x term, is 8. The number in front of my last term that doesn't have any x in it is negative 10. I want to make sure those signs stick with it. So whether it's a positive 8 or a negative 10, I want to make sure those stick together. And I just care about the numbers. I don't care about the x squared or the x or anything like that. I don't even care about the 0. I just need the number in front of my x squared, the number in front of the x, and then that constant value at the end. So once we get each of these things, once we get each of these 3 numbers, we are going to start filling in our quadratic formula. So I'm going to focus on just the top of my quadratic formula for right now, but we know it's the opposite of b. So I'm going to look at my b term 8, and I'm going to take the opposite of it. So right now it's a positive, so I'm going to make it a negative. So I'm going to have negative 8, and that plus or minus. This plus or minus symbol, the reason we have that there is like what we talked about with our square roots. We can either get a positive square root or a negative square root for those answers. And they always meant that there were the 2 possibilities from a square root. I could have that positive square root solution or the negative square root solution. So this plus or minus is saying that there's going to be 2 solutions to the square root, just like how we had to split the problem up into 2 pieces. Same thing with quadratic formula. I'm going to have the positive solution and the negative solution. So I'm going to have 8, and then we're going to have plus or minus. I think I have a button for this one. It's right there. Where is it? Plus or minus. Okay, we're going to insert that in there. So this means I'm going to do my problem twice, essentially. Once with plus, once with minus. And then we're going to take the square root of my b number squared, so 8 squared minus 4 times my a term, which is 2, and then times my c term, which is negative 10. I want to make sure, once again, that negative sticks with it. And all of this stuff is under that square root. That's all under that square root together. Oh, that line looks pretty thick. And then on the bottom of my fraction, under the bottom of my fraction is my, let me thin that line out. That's kind of distracting. There, that makes it a little bit better. Now it looks like it's part of the square root. Under the bottom of my fraction is 2 times a. So it's that -4 is always going to be in there, and that 2 is always going to be in there. That's just really how the formula is derived. It has that 2 in it. It has that 4 in it. It's just how it works. So it's 2 times my a term, which my a term was 2 again. So 2 times 2. So all I did was just took those numbers and filled it into the quadratic formula. And this is the fun part. I could go through and I could solve all this by hand by doing 8 squared minus 4 times 2 times -10, figuring out what the square root of that is, and then figuring out all these pieces and doing the plus and then doing the minus. I could do all that. Or what we can do is we can type this into our calculator to make this a lot easier for us. So I'm going to put this into Desmos because that's the calculator that you'll be able to see for me. And all I'm going to do is just take this quadratic formula. I'm just going to type it into Desmos. But I'm going to have to do it essentially twice, and I'll show you why. So we're going to have, I'm going to first make a fraction. I'm going to have the opposite of 8. And then we had, so the plus or minus, I'm going to do it twice. I'm going to do it once where it's plus and once where it's minus. So plus or minus, I'm going to start with plus. So -8 plus the square root. And if you need to do square root, you can do SQRT, or there should be, if my thing's in the way, you can do the little square root button down. Oh, get that out of the way. You can do the square root button that's right here. Either of those will work, or you can type in SQRT. Either of those will happen. So it's opposite of b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4 times a times c, and it was a -10. Make sure that negative's with it. And then all over 2a, which our a was 2. 2 times 2. So all I did is I typed in that quadratic formula into Desmos. I just used the plus this time, and I get x equals 1. So my solution to my first part of my quadratic formula is x equals 1. That is one of my two solutions. All I have to do to get my other solution is change this plus to a minus. Hit minus. Boom, my other answer is -5. And we have solved our quadratic. So this is the quadratic formula, essentially. All we're doing is getting our quadratic into standard form, writing down A, B, C, filling out our formula, and then typing it into the calculator. If you need to do a fraction bar on the calculator, where you can type it on the top and bottom, if you hit math, left, enter, that should create a fraction bar for you. Math, left on the D-pad, and then enter. Let's look at another example of this. Let me check how much time we're going for at the moment. Okay, getting close to 15 minutes. So we'll try to wrap this up. All right, looking at this problem here, I have x squared minus 4x equals -1. Now I want to make sure that this is set equal to 0. My number one step, once again, is set it equal to 0. So I see this -1 here. I want to get everything to one side. So instead of having that -1 there, I want to add 1 and move it over, just like how we did with factoring to get everything equal to one side. So now my new quadratic I'm going to have, my new quadratic is going to be x squared minus 4x plus 1 equals 0. Make sure we watch out for that sign change as we move from one side of our quadratic to the other. And then once we get it set equal to 0, next step is getting what is a equal to. Well, a is the number from my x squared. If I don't have a number in front of there, I know it's 1. B is the number in front of our x term, which looks like it's going to be -4. Watch out for those signs. And then my c term, my last number with my constant, is just a +1 as well. So I have a is 1, b is -4, and c is 1. Okay, now filling in our quadratic formula, I'm going to draw my little fraction bar. And I know in the top of that quadratic, I'm going to have, my first thing is opposite of b. So if I have a -4, the opposite of b, if I were to think about negative, is like a positive. So I have +4. And then we know it's our plus or minus, wherever that symbol went, plus or minus. And then we're going to add in the square root. And I'll put the roof on my square root in just a moment. So I have 4 plus or minus the square root of b squared. So it's -4 squared. We want to make sure that negative is included in there, and it's a -4 squared in parentheses, because if that negative isn't in the parentheses, it could change my problem. And then -4, get out of those exponents, minus 4 times a, 4 times a, which was 1, times c, which was also 1. So 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus a times 4 times 1. I'll roof my quadratic formula, or our square root for us, and then all over 2a. So 2 is, or my a is 1 as well. So all over 2 times 1. Now, once again, all I have to do is take this, type this into my calculator, and then I'll get my two solutions, once with plus, once with minus. So pulling up Desmos once again, all I really need to do is change the numbers. So we had a positive 4 plus 4, negative 4 squared, I'm sorry, negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times positive 1 all over 2 times 1. And here, this is why this quadratic formula is very handy. If we were to try to solve this quadratic, if we were to try to factor this, we would have to think of two numbers that multiply to get 1, add to get negative 4. And that is not possible. That is not a factorable solution. So we would have been stuck. If we had tried to solve this by factoring, we would not have been able to solve it. But the quadratic formula can get past those limitations. So with quadratic formula, I still get an answer. I get 3.373, or sorry, 3.73. I'll round to the nearest hundreds to make it easy for us. So x equals 3.73 is one solution. And then my other solution is going to be x equals, and all I have to do is go back and change that plus to a minus. Because there's no way I would have came up with 3.73 as one of my factors of this quadratic. 0.2, let's see, if we round that up, 0.27. So very, very odd numbers. So not numbers that we would be able to come up with by factoring, unless you're really, really good with multiplying by decimals and you know decimal factors. That's why quadratic formula is super handy, because it can solve those problems that aren't factorable as well. All right, I'm going to just start one more question. I'm not going to go all the way through and solve it, just so you can see an example of it. But hopefully you're getting the hang of this quadratic formula. I know it looks intense at first. I know it looks intimidating, but the more you work through these problems, the faster it's going to become and the easier it's going to be. It might take you a bit of a moment to start and solve these to start with, but the more you do it, the more comfortable it'll be, and I promise the easier they'll become. So let's look at this problem right here. I think it's at the bottom left-hand side of your page. It's x squared equals 7x. Now look at this. There's only two terms here, and they're on opposite sides of my equal sign. So the very first thing I want to do in order to solve this with quadratic formula is, once again, get everything set equal to 0. So I need to get everything to one side. So I am going to inverse 7x from one side of my problem, inverse 7x from the other side, because I know if I do it to one side, I have to do it to the other. So everything becomes on one side, and this is going to leave me with x squared, x squared, I don't like typing this, minus 7x equals 0. So that's our new quadratic, x squared minus 7x equals 0. From there, now that it's equal to 0, we can write down what is a, what is b, and what is c. So looking at it, the number in front of my x squared, there is no number once again, so it's just going to be 1. The number in front of my b, I got that negative 7. And then the number in front of my c, wait, there is no c term. There is no last term in this case. I don't have a term by itself. Oh, so in that case, my c term is just 0, because that term doesn't show up in my quadratic. It's just going to be 0. So when I start filling in that quadratic formula, when I start typing it in, that c, anytime I see a c, there's going to be a 0, which is going to eliminate some things. So we can even do quadratic formula even when we don't have all three terms. If I have a term that's missing, if I'm missing the b term in the middle, if I'm missing the c term at the end, I can just put 0 in for those values, and the quadratic formula will help us solve those even as well, which makes it nice and handy for us like that. I believe if you were to type this into the calculator, your opposite of b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. If you were to get that in the calculator, fill in those values, we should get two answers of, I believe 0 and 7 are the two solutions to this quadratic. So hopefully, sorry for taking a long time on the video. Hopefully this helps clarify quadratic formula a bit, and hopefully it doesn't seem too intimidating. I will hopefully, cross my fingers, be back tomorrow, and we can talk about this more together as a class and work on it together as a group, and answer any other questions you might have. Feel free to email me if you're really struggling. I can do my best to help you any way I can.